I think this is a fundamental change.
Promulgation of the Constitution.
Hello and welcome to the 10th episode in the series, The Evolution of a Nation, a documentary series chronicling Uganda's political and economic history since 1944. I'm Bat Kakoza. In the previous episode, we featured the 1971 Idi Amin's military coup. In this episode, we take a look at Amin's first year in power and the expulsion of Asians from Uganda. Thanks for joining us. The first few months of Amin in power was obviously a honeymoon for him and his supporters.
We took him at his word that he had taken over so that Uganda would have a better future. And the reasons that were given, the 18 reasons for the takeover, were legitimate and valid at the time, and therefore that's why the takeover was widely welcomed.
He renounced Obote's non-aligned foreign policy, and his government was quickly recognized by Israel, Britain, and United States.
And when Amin took over, the British welcomed him. So the British was the first to acknowledge, to recognize Amin's government.
By contrast, Presidents Julius Nyerere of Tanzania, Kenneth Kaunda of Zambia, Jomo Kenyatta of Kenya, and the Organization of African Unity initially refused to accept the legitimacy of the new military government. Nyerere in particular opposed Amin's regime, and he offered hospitality to the exiled Obote.
Being a member of the Mulungushi Club, Nyerere was very happy to host him in Dar es Salaam.
Amin's cabinet, which was inclusive of professionals and experts, was hailed by both local and international commentators.
The military, obviously initially they thought because there's a military takeover, they wanted soldiers to be in the government. But one point you can sort of accord him, allow him, is that he felt he couldn't really rely on these soldiers to be in prominent positions in government, and therefore he looked around. I do remember at the time the people were coming to him with a list of proposed names in government. If you went to see him, they would say, here's a list of who I think should be in government. And at one time, Abu Mayanja, for example, went to see him. Amin said to him, Abu Mayanja, go and draw me a list of people who you think should be in my government. And he said, shall I include myself, sir? So he said, you include yourself. So he came up with a list. But the fact of the matter is that many of the lists that came up had one Mekibedi as Minister of Foreign Affairs. The only member of military person was Zobito Gama. The rest were civilians. They were professional people. And people would be fair, would acknowledge that that's maybe one of the best governments that Uganda has had, because they were all professionals.
I was at that time warden of Mitchell Hall and teaching at Makerere School of Education in science education. So I was a warden and a quiet man out there. I had friends, and one of them was Wanume Kibedi. Old friends from London days. He used to come and see me. He told me what was happening. So one day he said, Edward, do you think you could join us as a minister? I said, nothing doing. Why? Because this man, Amin, has promised 2 years only to be in power. So I don't want to interrupt my program. At that time, Kibedi, Paulo Mwanga, were the two key people in setting up the new government. Yes. They are the ones who were sourcing the best people to come and join government. And it was easier because I think Amin decided that the majority the majority of ministers should be the previous permanent secretaries.
Yes.
So anyway, so I was brought in to help Ab Mayanja, who was the Minister of Education, who was having problems with NUSU. You know NUSU?
Yeah, National Union of Students
Of Uganda.
of Uganda.
The UPC wanted to form a national youth service.
Yes.
They even passed a bill, but it never took off. But at the same time, they said, if we can't do that, let us focus on the youth in schools. So really, that was creating a group of cadres who later on could become leaders in UPC. And they were very powerful. They had access to government funds. They had an office in the office of the president. So they were quite a powerful team. And amongst those, Uganda at that time was, Dr. Uganda was, I think, the president of NUSU. Later, Monyo Joke had been the previous president, and so on. They were quite a powerful team of young people. I was now appointed Assistant Minister of Education under Abu Mayanja. It was on radio, by the way. They said, you're a minister, 7 o'clock, 7:30, a car will be waiting for you with a bodyguard and a driver and all that at Mitchell Hall. So 7:30 they were there. I went straight to Amin, to Kibede's office. He took me to Amin's office. I never seen the man, apart from the pictures. He welcomed me. He said he knew that I was also very good at education. That's how he put it. So can you help Honorable Ab Mayanja, who has been confused by Kabaka Yaka or something like that? So I'm willing, sir. Now, before we set out to do other things, I asked a question. Excuse me, Mr. President, can I sit in cabinet? This was a surprise question to both of them. So they said, you go out, remain behind. They discussed it, that is Wanumi and Amin. They said, oh, yes, you can sit in cabinet because you are the only assistant minister. And besides, we want you to know what is happening with the students.
In 1971, General Idi Amin, the man who played the key role in the Kabaka's eviction from his palace and eventually his kingdom, decided to return the Kabaka's remains home for a state funeral. Amin wanted to win the hearts of Baganda so that they support his still new government. Amin got his calculations right. Although they were fully aware of his role in the attack on the Lubiri, the Baganda readily forgave Amin and for some time even supported his government because he had toppled their number one enemy.
Because we do not want the Kabaka's remains to remain in England. We want them in Kampala, in Buganda here, Kasubi. But we could not do this before. I got information that if you dared bring the remains back during Obote's time, they would desecrate the body. So we kept it there. And then Amin, when he had taken over the reins of power, I think he wanted also to please the Baganda, get the political thing. So he agreed.
After forming his government, Amin started off with focusing on the army. The institution, which had been progressively expanded under Obote, was further doubled and redoubled. Recruitment was largely, but not entirely, in the north. Retired Major General Zed Maluru, then flight captain, was one of the young, freshly trained Air Force personnel posted to Gulu to conduct the recruitment into the Air Force exercise.
Officially, they would say there is general recruitment. They would again go to districts or whatever. But then, before you knew what was happening, there was this problem of the so-called Nubians, what. They would do it quietly, either in Arua or Koboko or even Bombo. Then they had the final unit at Wamnanka. Before you knew, you would see a battalion arise from nowhere. The Maliamungus and the rest of them. And then you take them on. I mean, what can you do?
Following the suspension of the constitution, Amin instituted an advisory defense council composed of military officers with himself as the tough chairman who gave tough orders that had to be obeyed without question.
Toughness is good because the people respect you, and tough man is a quality which you can find for the high command, because when he gives order, they know that that order is given by the strong man and must be obeyed. It is very important.
He placed the military tribunals above the system of civil law. He effectively implemented his powers to rule by decree.
If you don't have a parliament, you must have some rules to run the country. You must have some orders. Those orders, instead of being laws, are called decrees. Because you would say the Defense Council has advised. But the Defense Council, in actual fact, meant whether it was Bat with him at that time, that was the Defense Council. And the thing would become law immediately, because there is no question of assent, as is the case of Parliament. There is no debate. The debate must have gone on in the kitchen or in the sitting room where he was at any one time.
He disbanded the General Service Unit, GSU, an intelligence agency created by the previous government, and replaced it with the State Research Bureau. In addition, Amin set up the Public Safety Unit based at Naguru Police Training School. In theory, the unit was meant to deal with urban thuggery, condoism, that had emerged during the economic crisis under the deposed Obote regime.
Public safety unit was created because there were robberies, outright robberies, and most of them were being committed by soldiers and their friends. Actually, they would arm them, they would arm the robbers again. Now, they created that unit and it was made up of mostly people who were in special force. It was headed by Towil. Towil was not originally from our police force. Towil came from Kenya. He was in Kenya, but after independence, the three states agreed to swap police officers. Those who were in Kenya, Ugandans who were in Kenya, to come. Kenyans who were here, to go to Kenya. He had been transferred here. So, PSU was made purposely to combat robbery. Actually, they made operations, but they would not take anybody to court. Most of the robbers, whether robbers or not, they would execute them.
With several tours abroad were outstanding triumphs of diplomacy and in the making of friends.
In mid-1971, Idi Amin made his first presidential trip abroad.
Talks with her Willy Brandt.
He visited Germany, Austria, Britain and Israel, the key allies that had recognized and pledged to support his government after the coup. The trip was later to set the stage for the subsequent expulsion of the non-citizens, particularly the Asians. Now, in order to understand the issue of the expulsion of Asians, it is important to know the background. As we saw in the first episode, colonial Uganda had strongly favored Asians. Many arrived with British colonialists to do clerical work or semi-skilled manual labor in farming and construction. They had a salary which became the capital to start businesses. One significant provision in the Independence Constitution was an article which stated that those people who were not Ugandans, as at Uganda's independence on 9th October 1962, had 2 years to make up their minds whether to become citizens of the new Uganda or adopt the status of the British protected persons, in which case those would get a British passport. Now, many Asians at the time opted to apply for British citizenship. But because business was good in Uganda with no competition from the locals, many people did not leave. In 1969, Britain passed the Patriots Act, which provided that Commonwealth passport holders would need a visa to enter Britain. Commonwealth members reacted to it very, very strongly. The government of Uganda, then under President Milton Obote, was short of ways to deal with all those Asians in Uganda. He's quoted as having said that if Britain was making rules barring us from opportunities in Britain, then we also have our own rules to regulate those who are coming here. That was when Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania realized that they needed their own immigration acts. And the first immigration acts were subsequently passed in 1969 in reaction to the British Patriots Act. By 1971, the issue of Asians being Ugandans or not remained unaddressed beyond the provisions in the 1962 Constitution. On the 6th of December 1971, Amin convened a meeting of leaders of Asian community, during which he expressed a number of grievances against the Asians that he claimed caused disharmony in the country between the indigenous people and the Asians. The speech was an ominous warning to the members of the Asian community.
There was a plan to send them, even the British and the Uganda government during Obote one agreed on quotas every year to send so many, every year to send so many. This is it confirms that it was concern of everybody.
On the 4th August 1972, Amin issued a decree ordering the expulsion of the 70 holders of British passports, including approximately 50,000 Asians of Indian and Pakistan descent, except for professionals such as lawyers, doctors, and teachers. He gave them 90 days in which they had to make arrangements and hand over their business interests to their nominees.
He didn't negotiate with anybody, he just ordered. In 3 years, in 3 months, 90 days out. So it became inhuman.
The arrangement among most Asian families was that one would be Ugandan, another one Indian, another British. So the non-Ugandan transferred their businesses to the Ugandans.
And all around there was a scramble for property. And they leave their properties behind, their bank accounts, their factories, their farms, their hotels, everything. And therefore those who remain behind have to share it out. And obviously the government, if you're a government minister, you would be in a good position to get something for yourself. So it's
Did you get anything for yourself?
Nothing, not even a bicycle.
The remaining property was seized by government. He called this move the economic war.
Declaration of the economic war was not, and I will say, not on the Asians. Asians were brought here by the British because they were forced to come here as laborer to build the railway from Mombasa to Kampala.
The decision to expel Asians made Amin extremely popular across the country. He told Ugandans that it was the ordinary people, including the poor, who would be the biggest beneficiaries of the economic war. However, the biggest beneficiaries turned out to be those who were close to him, mostly soldiers. Many other black Ugandans, especially those with ties to the government, also shared the loot.
People who took over from the Asians were not aware. They didn't know. They didn't know what was happening. They didn't know business. They didn't anything. But there are many people also who has that action has opened their minds, and they are benefited.
Most of the expelled Asians who were accounted for went to Britain, Canada, India, Kenya, Tanzania, Malawi, Pakistan, West Germany, and the United States. About 20,000 were unaccounted for.
All these city industries, thousands of industries, farms, business, and all this was not Ugandan. No Ugandans was living in the towns, and even ministers' offices in Kampala and in Entebbe, some of them were being hired from the non-citizens. But all this, I asked them to become citizens of Uganda. They refused, and then I took a decision to expel them from Uganda.
Following the expulsion of Asians, India severed diplomatic relations with Uganda. The same year, Amin broke diplomatic ties with the UK and nationalized 85 British-owned businesses. By the end of 1972, the economy which Amin had found in good condition was shriveling. The businesses were mismanaged and industries collapsed from lack of maintenance. This proved disastrous for the already declining economy.
You expel a group of what was building a middle class category in the country, you uproot them. So basically by uprooting them, you have a gap, a disconnect between the lower and high class. The middle class, commercial class is expelled. And he called it economic war, and indeed it was really a war on economy. The figures we have is the GDP declined, the exchange rate simply went out of this world. You had parallel exchange rate, the official one, and the Chibanda market. Production went down, foreign exchange went down, the economic went down, and the whole economy was administratively controlled.
Amin shifted from being a darling of the Western world and developed close links with the Arab countries. That year, relations with Israel soured. Although Israel had previously supplied Uganda with arms, in 1972 he expelled Israeli military advisors and turned to Muammar Gaddafi and the Soviet Union for support. The Soviet Union became Amin's largest arms supplier. East Germany, which had been involved in Obote's General Service Unit, continued with Amin's new secret police, the State Research Bureau. Incidentally, not everything about Uganda was gloom. At the 1972 Munich Summer Olympics, John Akibwa lifted Ugandan spirits by winning the country the first Olympic gold medal with the world record of 47.9 seconds in the 400 meters hurdles.
Here is Akibwa in lane 2, winning one of these golds, well ahead of William Kaski of Kenya with another Ugandan, Simba Ayo, third. His time, 48.5 seconds.
And that crowns our 10th episode. In the next episode, we take a look at the uprising against Amin's regime, specifically the September 1972 Ugandan dissidents' invasions from Tanzania and Amin's reactions. Thanks for watching and see you next time.